Good morning, everybody. It's great to see some familiar faces and names. This is Karen Murphy. I'm the coordinator for the Western Alaska Landscape Conservation Cooperative, and I have with me our new science coordinator, Elizabeth Powers. As Steve said, he asked me to give you kind of a quick overview of things that the Western Alaska LCC has been doing related to terrestrial systems and the topics that your group is interested in. So I'm going to kind of fly through a bunch of the work that we've done in the last couple of years and try and give you an overview of our activities related to climate change impacts in Western Alaska. I'm not going to spend much time talking about the Landscape Conservation Cooperative Network, and if you are not familiar with them and would like to talk with me outside of the presentation, please do. The only thing I want to raise right now is to remind you that these are self-directed partnerships. We have a steering committee comprised of state, federal, and tribal organizations that help us identify the best use of our attention and work in Western Alaska. And you can see by our mission that we are very much tied to looking at changes resulting from climate change. We started back in 2011 as one of the second group of LCCs to get stood up. And at that time, we had a fair amount of project dollars that we had to allocate fairly rapidly. And so what you see here are some of the types of projects that we funded in 2011 at a time where we really didn't have a strategic plan or a process for choosing what we would focus on, aside from the fact that we had just held a large scoping meeting to identify shared science needs. So that greatly influenced what we connected to. So you can see by this just quick glance that it ranges really widely from looking at caribou and vegetation to streams and snow and ice and community assessments. So a real broad span of approaches. After this experience, we decided that we really wanted to look at things in a more integrated and focused approach. So we started to do a science strategy that focused on either coastal systems, freshwater systems, or terrestrial systems for a 2-year period of time. And within each of those systems, we narrowed the focus down to a particular topic. And what you see here in the yellow are those topics. So we've just finished both the coastal and the freshwater focus. That doesn't mean all of our projects are done, but that we have now moved on, and we're now in the second year of looking at terrestrial habitat features and impacts on important resources and services. And so we are in the second year of that, and we're now planning for our return back to a coastal systems in fiscal year 18 and 19. Since your group also looks at freshwater as part of your terrestrial, I'm going to include some of our work that we've done associated with this changes in temperature and its impacts. This diagram kind of shows you the areas that we were looking at, trying to advance our ability to do regional water temperature and monitoring and analyses in a way that would help us do predictions for how climate change is going to. Somebody's dog is barking in the background. You can leave it. So these, we had to look at things like minimum standards for data collection for water temperature, really with the specific eye towards being able to do these regional analyses. And the Alaska Climate Science Center has been very engaged with us throughout the Can you hear me now? Meredith, would you give me a thumbs up if you can hear me? Okay, thank you. So you can see sort of the range of topics that we were working on as part of the freshwater temperature and its impacts on stream habitats. As part of this, we helped fund the minimum protocols for data collection, stream temperature. We supported 2 different implementation areas where we've worked with partners to expand the amount of empirical data that's being collected that meets the standards that we just defined. We funded several different studies that looked at vulnerability of systems and of fish to changes in temperature. So just showing you 2 of them that we help support. And we're still kind of running through this list of topics and steps that need to be completed to really be able to achieve this goal of being able to do climate change projections for fish habitat into the future in Western Alaska. The little checks and the check minuses are things that, I think we did a pretty good job of getting an online catalog of who's doing what. That's Marcus Geist, the Alaska Oats database. We've got a good start on implementation strategies, but only for 2 of the regions within Western Alaska, so there's more work to be done there. Dan Schindler and other partners have done quite a bit of work looking at vulnerability assessments and predictive scenarios, but there's still a lot more that needs to happen here for us to be able to really convince managers of how the system's going to change and what ramifications that will have on fisheries. The Alaska Climate Science Center is helping us with this, trying to give us some recommendations for data management and architecture that we can use related to particularly our small partner data collection efforts. So the agencies usually have a place to store their data, but an individual tribe may not, and we need to kind of resolve a long-term solution for that. And likewise, we are looking, waiting for them to come back with a spatial design assessment that will help us identify where we want to try and keep long-term water temperature data loggers in place in order to be able to advance the overall analysis for the region. For terrestrial systems, which is where we are right now, we have been looking at these changes on habitats and impacts on important resources and services. This is less well integrated than some of our other efforts, but I will give you an overview of what we did here as well. But first, I want to kind of give you a little bit of a background on some of the results that we had from our 2011 suite of projects. And some of these relate to your performance elements as well. We worked with Vladimir Romanovsky to create to advance his permafrost network in northwestern Alaska, and as part of that product was a permafrost map for the Selawik Refuge. And also he was working to link the permafrost data to vegetation types with the hope that that's something that they could start expanding the projections for into the future. We have a new existing vegetation classification map for the northern half of the LCC. This is still based on the Landsat imagery that was used for land fire, but the analysis was done differently and with a local vegetation expert. We funded a study looking at permafrost dynamics and lake dynamics, and part of that was to assess the landscape scale change of lake area and lake count in these regions within Western Alaska. This is work that Praja Lindgren did from UAF. Ryan Wilson, who was then with the Wilderness Society, looked at satellite imagery from a European satellite that enabled them to assess the thaw and refreeze patterns across the state. This is only historic and not predictive information, but it gave us a good idea of the average number of events that happen in the winter and their scale and size. And of course, the reasons behind this is because we want to know how this might affect both travel for people, but also ungulates and other wildlife species. We supported Don Spellinger and partners in looking at winter caribou habitat and diets on the southern Alaska Peninsula and Unimak Islands. You see just a snapshot here of one of the graphics that's looking at the diet from Unimak Island caribou in the wintertime. We also supported projects that looked at the vulnerability for a couple of communities within the Bristol Bay region. And this is the first time that the Alaska Tribal Health Consortium was able to go into the Bristol Bay region and help develop these vulnerability plan assessments. And also we helped support ANTHC with launching the LEO network, which is the Local Environmental Observers Network. And I don't think I need to tell this team about this work, or at least I certainly hope we don't, but the integrated ecosystem model that the Climate Science Center has been taking the lead on, RLCC steering committee has been a supporter of this since its inception and has helped co-fund especially the initial 5 years of this work. So that gives you just kind of a snapshot of some of the things that we have as outcomes from our initial year of work, where we had quite a few things that were more terrestrial in focus. For this year, we have had less project funding, so which seems to be the name of the game these days, but we still supported several different projects, and some of these are just getting underway this year, so there's no early outcomes. And you can see they're kind of still split between our human biological, landscape, and geophysical systems. Jamie Van Lannen with the Department of Fish and Game is doing a really interesting study where they're looking at the Mulchatna caribou herd, and they're using traditional ecological knowledge with many communities within the herd's range to talk to them about distribution patterns and timing and habitat use. And then they're going to tie that to Fish and Game's collared caribou data and look at the picture with both our Western science information and the traditional ecological knowledge. Rachel Lohman with USGS is working on developing a Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta berry outlook that will help the community of Chivak as the pilot or the test community hopefully be able to predict where there's going to be stronger or weaker berry opportunities for harvest later in the summer. Fish and Game and Fish and Wildlife Service are collaborating on working to improve the moose sightability index for a portion of the Alaska Peninsula, where most of our moose monitoring work is done based on the idea that you're looking at moose on a white background of snow, so they're pretty easy to count. They're a lot more difficult to count when it's brown on brown. So they're assessing those different sightability indices, and we hope to be holding a workshop next year with federal and state moose biologists to talk in broader terms about how to tackle this issue of low snow cover when we need to have most of our survey methodologies based on a solid snow cover. Ling Jeanette with UAF is going to be starting a project this summer that's looking at the vulnerability of shorebirds and waterfowl on the Delta, This expands the IEM's thermokarst model to include the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta. So that's going to be exciting, and she'll link that to habitat suitability for waterfowl and other water birds. We're also supporting J.J. Frost in a project that kind of ties into his Alaska Above project, but this one looks at how permafrost is changing after tundra fires out on the Delta. And this information is going to be utilized both in Helene Jeanette's work as well as in Rachel Lohman's project. Well, and I guess I should go back there. A couple of other things that are not on here. We worked with many different agency partners to get USGS 3-depth program to help us pay for LIDAR out on the outer coast of the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta. So we've got almost 1,700 square miles of LIDAR that should be available later this summer, and it will cover the regions. It also includes the community of Imanak, Scammon Bay. It covers the broad swath of land between Hooper Bay and the new community of Fernutak, Matarvik. And then it includes Makoriak on whatever island, and I'm just spacing the island name, sorry. So that should be available soon, and is also going to be used for the projects that are on the YK Delta. And then we're working with the Climate Science Center has supported Brad Griffith up at UAF and the USGS Cooperative Center to do a study looking at forest change and moose and caribou dynamics. And they were unable to provide travel money to go out to communities because of some restrictions within their funding opportunities. So the LCC has chipped in money to enable them to get out and do community visits as part of that work. So that kind of gives you an overview of the things that we're currently working on related to terrestrial and freshwater systems. As I said, we're going back into a coastal systems phase, and I know this isn't the target of this group, but there is a connection here, so bear with me for a moment. We just completed in 2016 a series of 4 workshops on coastal resilience and adaptation that perhaps some of you were able to attend one of them, but we had a huge partnership of over 200 participants, 14 state and federal agencies, 35 individual tribes, plus the regional associations participating, and did an effort where we looked at changes that were happening, tools that are available to assess or address changes, and identifying gaps in science needs. Since many of the people that are participating in these workshops utilize terrestrial systems as well as coastal and marine systems, some of the questions and things that we got out of this relate back into our topics with your group. And so I'm just showing you here a couple of the things that the Western Alaska LCC went through and looked at this database of information and needs associated from these workshops. And we ultimately settled on one of the topics that we're going to pursue for the coastal region will have to do with species shifts, specifically looking for ways that we might be able to document and project and predict species shifts in a way that might make harvest regulations more flexible or more in tune with the actual changes on the ground. And so what you see on this slide is some of the science questions had to do with birds or caribou migration patterns, or a lot of questions from folks in regions of the states where beaver are now expanding to. A lot of concern over that expansion and fish habitat, and a lot of interest in being better able to understand and predict the arrival times or colonization potential, or change it on how, you know, salmon and whitefish too will respond to changes in temperature in freshwater systems. So our LCC will be taking on this species shifts question. I don't know yet how focused will be on coastal species for the near term, but I think that these questions have a lot of relevance to a wider range of interests and opportunities. So with that, we're in this place right now after these workshops where we're really trying to figure out how we can better pursue co-production. And I just want to talk about co-production for a few moments, because our view of this is starting to evolve differently. And I would say that in the past, most of us, or many of us, myself included, have looked at co-production as how do we get the scientists and researchers and the decision makers to work closely together throughout the whole process of developing and identifying tools and things through the scientific process, so that the outcomes are really usable to the decision makers' needs. So that's how I looked at co-production in the past. But I now realize that our Alaska Native partners really look at co-production as a merging of the two different ways of knowing, bringing the traditional ecological knowledge to the same level as scientific knowledge, and finding ways that we can enhance both through communication throughout that complete process. And of course, the ultimate goal is to have a co-production process that looks like this, where we have both indigenous knowledge and scientific method studies working together to inform decision makers. So we are interested in pursuing this. We're not entirely sure how to go into this much beyond the way that we are doing things with workshops and, you know, projects like the Van Lannen work to look at the Mulchatna caribou herd movements with both TEK and scientific data. So we'd be happy to have some insights from you all on that if you care to share something. So that's all I have for you this morning. My contact information is up here, as well as our website location. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions.